On the day that was supposed to define love and loyalty, my parents boarded a plane to Hawaii, leaving me standing at the altar with 2 empty seats in the front row and a white envelope that didn't just break my heart. It shattered every illusion I'd ever held about family. You think betrayal ends with tears and sleepless nights. You think abandonment just leaves scars. Wait until you see what happens when a daughter finally stops begging for love and starts demanding justice instead. My name is Samantha Reed, and I've spent 32 years learning that love is conditional, especially when it comes from Linda and Charles Reed, the 2 people who gave me life but never quite figured out how to give me their time. Standing in the bridal suite of the Grand Peaks Hotel in downtown Denver that morning, I should have been glowing with pre-wedding jitters. Instead, I was staring at my phone, reading the same text message for the 15th time. Emergency business opportunity in Hawaii. Flight leaves at 11:30 So sorry, sweetheart. We'll make it up to you. Love, Mom and Dad. 11:30 in the morning. My wedding was at 3 p.m. Sam, Chloe Martin, my maid of honor and the closest thing I had to a sister, peered around the bathroom door. You've been quiet for the last 20 minutes. Everything okay? I held up the phone, my hands trembling slightly. They're not coming. Chloe's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, then pure rage. What do you mean they're not coming? It's your wedding day. Apparently there's some deal in Hawaii that couldn't wait. I laughed, but it came out hollow and bitter. A business opportunity that was more important than watching their only daughter get married. This was Linda and Charles Reed in their purest form. My father, a real estate mogul who'd built his empire by buying up struggling properties and flipping them into luxury developments. And my mother, who managed his charitable foundation, though I'd always suspected the charity part was more about tax breaks than actually helping people. They lived in a world where everything had a price tag, including family obligations. Growing up in their 6,000-square-foot house in Cherry Hills Village, I'd learned early that birthdays could be postponed for business trips, Christmas mornings could be interrupted by urgent phone calls, and graduation ceremonies were optional if there was money to be made elsewhere. They loved me in their way. I suppose they paid for my education at University of Colorado, helped me buy my first car, even contributed to the down payment on the modest townhouse Michael and I shared in Capitol Hill. But they'd never quite grasped that showing up mattered more than showing up with gifts. I can't believe this, Chloe muttered, pacing the small room. I mean, I can believe it because it's them. But Jesus, Sam, your wedding day. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling street below. Normal people going about their Saturday afternoon, completely unaware that my world was cracking apart 20 floors above them. You know what the worst part is? I'm not even surprised. I keep thinking I should be devastated, but mostly I'm just tired. The knock on the door interrupted my spiral into self-pity. Ladies, it's Michael. I opened the door to find my soon-to-be husband standing in the hallway, looking impossibly handsome in his charcoal gray suit. His warm brown eyes immediately searched my face, and I watched his expression shift from excitement to concern. What's wrong? He asked, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. My parents are in Hawaii, I said simply. Michael's jaw tightened. He'd witnessed enough of my parents' behavior over the past 3 years to understand exactly what this meant. They left today. Emergency business opportunity, I quoted, making air quotes with my fingers. Too important to pass up, apparently. Michael pulled me into his arms, and for a moment, I let myself sink into his warmth. This man, this wonderful, steady, present man, had shown me what it looked like when someone actually prioritized the people they loved. His parents, Janet and Robert Turner, had been in Denver since Thursday, helping with last-minute wedding preparations and treating me like the daughter they'd never had. The contrast was painful. I'm so sorry, Sam, Michael whispered into my hair. They're missing the most important day of your life. No, I said, pulling back to look at him. They're missing the most important day of our life. And honestly, maybe it's better this way. At least now I know exactly where I stand. But even as I said the words, I could feel something shifting inside me. The familiar ache of disappointment was there. Yes, but underneath it was something new, something harder and more determined. At 3:15 p.m., I walked down the aisle of the hotel's elegant ballroom on the arm of Michael's father, who'd offered to stand in when we'd realized my own father wouldn't be there. The ceremony was beautiful, intimate, heartfelt, surrounded by friends and family who'd actually bothered to show up. But every time my eyes drifted to those 2 empty seats in the front row, reserved with small white cards reading Mr. and Mrs. Reed, I felt that hardness in my chest grow a little stronger. After the ceremony, after the photos, after the first dance and the cake cutting, a hotel employee approached me with a white envelope. Mrs. Turner, this was left for you at the front desk earlier today. I knew before I opened it that it was from them. The expensive cardstock, the embossed family crest my mother insisted on using for everything it all screamed Linda and Charles Reed. Inside was a key. Not just any key, but one attached to an elegant tag reading 1247 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, CA. There was also a folded letter and a small USB drive. My hands were shaking as I read the letter, written in my mother's perfect cursive. Dearest Samantha, we know you must be disappointed that we couldn't be there today. But please understand that sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the greater good. The property in Malibu is yours now, completely paid for, as is your mortgage in Denver. The USB contains a video explanation of everything we've prepared for your future. We love you more than you know, and everything we do is for you. Love, always, Mom and Dad. I stared at the key, feeling something dark and ugly unfurling in my chest. They thought they could buy their way out of this. They thought a house and some money could make up for 32 years of choosing business over their daughter, of missing every moment that mattered, of treating love like a transaction. They were wrong. But as I stood there in my wedding dress, holding the key to what was probably $1 million property, I realized something else they'd just given me the perfect weapon. The familiar ache of abandonment wasn't new. It was an old wound that had been festering for decades, reopened fresh and raw on what should have been the happiest day of my life. As I sat in the hotel suite later that evening, still in my wedding dress, the memories came flooding back with crystalline clarity. My 8th birthday. I'd planned everything perfectly handmade invitations with glitter and stickers, a chocolate cake that I'd helped our housekeeper Mrs. Rodriguez bake, even party games written out on index cards. 20 kids from my class showed up to our sprawling house in Cherry Hills Village, but my parents were in San Francisco, closing a deal on some luxury condos. They'd left a pile of expensive presents and a note promising to celebrate when they got back. We never did. High school graduation, valedictorian speech, full scholarship to University of Colorado. The works. I'd scanned the crowd for their faces as I walked across the stage, but found only Mrs. Rodriguez dabbing her eyes with a tissue in the family section. My parents had flown to New York that morning for what my father called a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. They watched the ceremony later on the live stream, or so they claimed. College move-in day, when other parents were crying and taking photos and embarrassing their kids with too many hugs, mine sent a moving company and a credit card. My first heartbreak, when I called home sobbing at 2:30 in the morning only to get voicemail because they were at some charity gala in Aspen. My first job at Evergreen Foundation, where I'd thrown myself into environmental work partly because I'd hoped it might finally make them proud. They'd made polite noises about my little nonprofit and suggested I think about law school instead. Every milestone, every moment when I'd needed them most, there had been something more important. A deal to close, a client to schmooze, a networking event that couldn't be missed. They'd built their empire while I'd built my walls, learning to expect nothing so the disappointment wouldn't hurt so much. Sam. Michael's voice pulled me back to the present. He'd changed out of his tuxedo into jeans and a soft gray sweater, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee from the hotel's room service. You've been staring at that key for 20 minutes. I accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. Do you know what your parents said to me during the father-daughter dance? Michael settled beside me on the couch, his presence steady and comforting. What? Yeah, your dad said he was honored to stand in, but that he wished my father could have been there to see how radiant I looked. Your mom squeezed my hand and told me that sometimes families are built by choice, not just blood. I laughed, but it came out shaky. They've known me for 3 years, Michael. 3 years, and they've shown me more parental love than my own parents have in 32. The contrast was devastating. Janet Turner had helped me pick out my wedding dress, had been there for every fitting, had thrown me a bridal shower where she'd given a speech about how lucky they were to gain me as a daughter. Robert Turner had taken me aside a month before the wedding to have the talk, not about sex, but about how much they loved Michael and how they could see that he was going to be happy with me for the rest of his life. They showed up. They participated. They cared about the details that my own parents couldn't be bothered with. I keep thinking about that time your mom drove 4 hours to Boulder just because I mentioned I was stressed about my thesis defense. I continued. She brought homemade soup and stayed for 2 days, helping me practice my presentation. When I called my parents to tell them I'd passed with distinction, you know what my mother said. That's nice, dear. Your father and I are in meetings all day, but we'll talk soon. Michael's hand found mine, his thumb tracing gentle circles across my knuckles. They don't deserve you, Sam. They never have. The worst part is that I kept hoping. Every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment I kept thinking maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they'd choose me over their precious business. I held up the key, letting it catch the lamplight. Even now, part of me wants to be grateful. A house in Malibu. Sam. Most people would kill for that kind of gift. But you're not most people, Michael said quietly. And you didn't want a house. You wanted your parents at your wedding. I wanted them to want to be there, I corrected. I wanted them to think that watching their daughter get married was worth more than whatever deal they were chasing in Hawaii. Chloe knocked and entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a fierce expression. Okay, I've been thinking about this all night, and I need to say something. She plopped down in the armchair across from us, her bridesmaid dress wrinkled from the long day. Your parents are selfish, narcissistic assholes who have been emotionally neglecting you your entire life. There, I said it. Chloe. No, let me finish. She popped the champagne cork with more force than necessary. I've watched them disappoint you over and over again for 15 years. Remember sophomore year when you got mono and I had to take care of you because they were traveling for business? Or when you won that environmental leadership award and they couldn't even make it to the ceremony because they had dinner plans with some investors? The memories stung because they were all true. Chloe had been there for everything my parents had missed: late-night study sessions, breakups, panic attacks before big presentations at work. She'd been the one to hold my hair back when I had food poisoning, the one to drive me to the emergency room when I'd broken my wrist hiking, the one to listen to me cry after every phone call home that left me feeling smaller and less important. They've trained you to be grateful for scraps, Chloe continued, pouring champagne into the hotel's plastic cups. A house, some money, a fucking USB drive with an explanation. That's not love, Sam. That's guilt. Maybe they do feel guilty, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they were hollow. Maybe they realize they've made mistakes. If they felt guilty, they would have been here today, Chloe shot back. If they realized they'd made mistakes, they would have changed their behavior years ago. Instead, they're in Hawaii right now, probably toasting their latest deal and feeling proud of themselves for providing for their daughter's future. Michael squeezed my hand. What are you thinking, Sam? I looked down at the key again, feeling that hardness in my chest crystallize into something sharp and purposeful. I'm thinking that maybe it's time I stopped being grateful for scraps. The old Samantha would have tucked the key away, would have sent a polite thank you note, would have maybe even used the Malibu house for vacations while continuing to accept whatever minimal effort my parents were willing to give. She would have swallowed the hurt and made excuses for their behavior, the way she'd been doing her entire life. But something had shifted today. Sitting in that bridal suite, surrounded by the aftermath of the most important day of my life, I realized I was tired of being the understanding daughter, tired of making their choices easier by never demanding better, tired of loving people who only loved me when it was convenient. "You know what I'm going to do," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I'm going to find out exactly what's on that USB drive, and then I'm going to figure out just how my parents have been providing for my future." Because something told me that a couple who could abandon their daughter's wedding for a business deal might have other secrets worth uncovering, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. The next morning, Michael and I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop, the USB drive, and a pot of coffee that had already been refilled twice. The wedding gifts were still piled in our living room, unopened, but all I could focus on was the small black device that held my parents' idea of an explanation. "You sure you want to do this?" Michael asked, his finger hovering over the laptop's trackpad. "Once we watch whatever's on here, we can't unwatch it." I nodded, though my stomach was churning. I need to know what they think justifies missing my wedding. The video file opened to reveal my parents sitting in what looked like my father's home office, both of them dressed impeccably as always. My mother's blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour the timestamp indicated 6:45 a.m. on my wedding day. They'd recorded this before abandoning me. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used for important clients. "We know you must be feeling hurt and confused right now, but we need you to understand that everything we do is for your future." My father leaned forward, his silver hair catching the light from his desk lamp. "Samantha, the opportunity that presented itself in Hawaii couldn't wait. We're talking about a partnership that will secure not just our family's financial future, but yours and your children's as well." "The Malibu house," my mother continued, "is just the beginning. We've been working for years to build something extraordinary for you. The property is worth $3.7 million, completely paid for. Your mortgage in Denver has been satisfied, but that's not all." The camera panned to show documents spread across my father's mahogany desk: property deeds, investment portfolios, trust fund paperwork. The numbers I could make out were staggering. "So, we've established a trust fund in your name worth $12 million, my father said, his voice filled with the pride he usually reserved for his biggest deals. "The principal will be available to you on your 35th birthday, but you can access the interest starting immediately. That's approximately $400,000 per year." My mother smiled that serene smile she wore when she thought she'd solved a problem with money. "We know we haven't always been the most present parents, but everything we've sacrificed has been for this moment. You'll never have to worry about money again. You can quit that little nonprofit job and focus on what really matters: building a family, traveling, enjoying life." "A little nonprofit job?" The words hit me like a slap. I worked 60-hour weeks at Evergreen Foundation, had helped secure over $2 million in grants for environmental cleanup projects, had been promoted to program manager ahead of colleagues with twice my experience. It wasn't little to me, it was my passion, my purpose, the work that got me up every morning. "The Hawaiian deal will triple our holdings in Pacific Rim developments," my father continued. "By the time you have children, we'll be able to leave them an inheritance that will set up their children's children. This is generational wealth. Samantha, this is legacy." The video went on for another 10 minutes, my parents explaining their various investments, their charitable foundation that apparently existed primarily for tax purposes, Their network of business contacts who could open doors for me if I ever wanted to leave my phase of environmental work behind. What struck me most wasn't the money, though. The amounts were breathtaking, but the complete tone deafness of it all. They spoke about my life like it was a problem to be solved with sufficient funding. They talked about my career like it was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. They discussed my future children like commodities to be provided for, rather than people to be loved and raised. Not once did they acknowledge that they'd abandoned me on my wedding day. Not once did they say they were sorry. They seemed genuinely proud of themselves for missing the most important day of my life in service of making me richer. Jesus Christ, Michael breathed as the video ended. They actually think this makes it okay. I stared at the frozen frame showing my parents' satisfied faces. They think they're good parents because they've made me financially secure. Sam, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Michael turned to face me fully. Where do you think all this money came from? It was the question I'd been avoiding, the nagging doubt that had been growing stronger with each new revelation. My parents were successful, yes, but $12 million successful, plus a Malibu mansion, plus whatever other properties they owned, plus enough liquid capital to pay off our mortgage as an afterthought. I don't know, I admitted. I never really thought about it. Dad's always been good at real estate, and Mom manages their foundation. Samantha. Michael's voice was gentle but firm. Your dad buys distressed properties and flips them. Even if he's very good at it, that doesn't usually generate this kind of wealth. And your mom's foundation, when was the last time you heard about them actually doing charitable work? I thought back through years of conversations with my parents. They mentioned the foundation constantly tax benefits, networking events, donor meetings, but actual charitable work, actual causes they supported. I couldn't think of a single specific project or donation they'd ever described in detail. You think they're hiding something, I said. I think $12 million doesn't just appear because someone's good at buying and selling houses, Michael replied. And I think people who are completely legitimate don't usually miss their daughter's wedding for opportunities that can't wait. I opened my laptop and started typing, Linda Reed Foundation Denver. The search results were surprisingly sparse for an organization that my parents claimed was so successful. A basic website with stock photos of smiling children and generic language about supporting communities in need. No specific programs, no financial reports, no list of grants or donations. Charles Reed Real Estate Development. More results here. But as I dug deeper, I found articles about zoning disputes, allegations of bid manipulation, complaints from community groups about gentrification. Nothing criminal, but a pattern of cutting corners and prioritizing profit over people. There's something else, I said, clicking through to a news article from 3 years ago. Look at this. Reed Development Partners faces investigation over tax credit abuse in low-income housing project. Michael read over my shoulder. The investigation was dropped due to lack of evidence, but several former employees alleged that the company was claiming tax credits for affordable housing units that were being rented at market rate. My hands were shaking as I continued searching. Reed Foundation, Reed Development. My parents' names appeared in dozens of articles, always skating just on the edge of controversy, always managing to avoid serious consequences. A pattern of business practices that seemed designed to extract maximum profit while maintaining plausible deniability. They used my name, I whispered, staring at a document I'd found buried in the foundation's sparse filing history. Look at this. 3 years ago, they established something called the Samantha Reed Children's Fund. I never knew about this. The fund claimed to provide educational support for underprivileged children, but the financial reports showed almost no actual disbursements to educational programs. Instead, most of the money seemed to flow through administrative costs and management fees that went back to my parents' other companies. They've been using you as a front, Michael said quietly. Your name, your reputation. Anyone who looked into the foundation would see it was named after their daughter who works for an environmental nonprofit. It gives them credibility. I felt sick, not just because my parents had deceived me, but because they'd made me complicit in their deception without my knowledge. Every person who donated to the Samantha Reed Children's Fund, thinking they were helping kids, had been lied to, and my name was on it. The Malibu house, I said suddenly. If they're willing to just give away a $4 million property, how much money are they really hiding, and where did it come from? Michael was already pulling up property records for the Malibu address. Purchased 6 months ago for $3.9 million cash, no mortgage, no financing. They just wrote a check. I stared at the screen, feeling that hard knot in my chest expand into something hot and determined. My parents hadn't just abandoned me, they'd built their fortune on lies and deception, used my name to legitimize their schemes, and then tried to buy my forgiveness with blood money. I want to see the house, I said. Sam, no, I want to see it. I want to understand exactly what they think they've bought with my childhood, my wedding day, and my name. Because suddenly, $12 million didn't seem like generosity. It seemed like evidence. The rage hit me at 3:27 in the morning. I'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling while Michael slept peacefully beside me, his arm draped protectively across my waist. But sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' satisfied faces from that video, heard my mother's voice dismissing my career as a little nonprofit job, felt the weight of that key burning a hole in my palm. $12 million, a mansion in Malibu, trust funds and tax shelters and charitable foundations that existed only on paper. All of it built while I spent my childhood eating dinner alone with the housekeeper, while I gave valedictorian speeches to empty chairs, while I planned a wedding around 2 people who couldn't be bothered to show up. I slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, where I made coffee with shaking hands and spread out all the documents we'd printed earlier: property records, foundation filings, news articles about investigations that had mysteriously disappeared. The evidence of my parents' true nature lay scattered across our small dining table like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too naive to see. Couldn't sleep either. Michael's voice made me jump. He stood in the doorway wearing boxers and a concerned expression, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles. I keep thinking about what your dad said during the father-daughter dance, I said without looking up from the papers, about how families are built by choice, not just blood. Michael sat down across from me, reaching for my hands across the table. Sam, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that for 32 years, I've been choosing them over and over again, and they've been choosing money. My voice came out steady, but I could feel something dangerous building behind my ribs. I'm thinking that they recorded that video at 6:45 on Saturday morning, which means they were already packed and ready to leave for Hawaii before I'd even woken up on my wedding day. Baby, I'm thinking, I continued, my voice growing stronger, that they've been using my name to legitimize their fraudulent charity work without my knowledge or consent. I'm thinking that the Samantha Reed Children's Fund has probably taken donations from people who believed they were helping actual children, when the money was really just being funneled back into my parents' pockets. Michael squeezed my hands. We don't know that for sure. Oh, don't we? I pulled up the foundation's tax filings on my laptop. Look at these numbers. Michael, in the last 3 years, the Samantha Reed Children's Fund has collected over $2 million in donations. Guess how much actually went to educational programs for children? He leaned forward to read the screen. Jesus, $47,000. Less than 2.5%. The rest went to administrative costs and management fees paid to companies owned by Linda and Charles Reed. I laughed, but it came out sharp and bitter. They've been committing fraud using my name, and then they have the audacity to gift me a mansion like I should be grateful. The coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I couldn't stop staring at those numbers. $2 million that should have gone to helping children, instead lining my parents' pockets. And somewhere out there were donors who thought they'd contributed to a good cause. People who'd written checks believing they were making a difference in kids' lives. "I feel sick," I whispered. "All those years I thought they were just absent, just selfish. But they're actually criminals, aren't they? They're stealing money meant for children and using my name to do it." Michael came around the table and pulled me into his arms. I wanted to melt into his warmth, to let him comfort me the way he had yesterday. But the rage was growing stronger, feeding on itself, transforming from hurt into something harder and more purposeful. "What's really making me angry," I said into his chest, "is that they think this makes us even. They think a house and some money erases 32 years of emotional neglect. They think I should be grateful that they've been building me a trust fund while they were too busy to attend my college graduation." "You don't have to be grateful for anything," Michael said firmly. "But that's just it. Part of me is grateful. Part of me still wants to call them and say thank you, because that's what I've been trained to do. They throw money at a problem and I'm supposed to smile and pretend it fixes everything." I pulled back to look at him. I'm 32 years old, and I'm still hoping they'll love me enough to actually show up. How pathetic is that? "It's not pathetic. It's human." "It's pathetic," I insisted. "And it's over. I'm done hoping they'll change. I'm done making excuses for them. I'm done protecting them from the consequences of their choices." Michael studied my face carefully. "What does that mean? Exactly?" I looked back at the papers spread across our table, evidence of fraud, tax evasion, charitable abuse, evidence that my parents weren't just absent, but actively harmful, evidence that they'd built their fortune by deceiving people who wanted to help children. "It means I'm going to find out exactly how deep this goes," I said. "The Malibu house, the trust fund, all of it. I want to know where every dollar came from." "And then what?" The question hung in the air between us. And then what? Turn them in to the authorities. Confront them directly. Take the money and try to forget where it came from. Walk away from all of it and pretend I'd never seen those tax filings. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I know I can't just pretend this didn't happen. I can't take their blood money and call it love." Chloe would probably tell me to burn it all down. She'd been watching my parents disappoint me for 15 years, and she'd probably see this as the perfect opportunity for justice. Michael would support whatever I decided. But I could see the worry in his eyes, worry that pursuing this would hurt me more than just walking away. But walking away felt impossible now. Every time I looked at that key, I saw 2 empty chairs at my wedding. Every time I thought about the trust fund, I heard my mother calling my career a little nonprofit job. Every time I considered the Malibu house, I remembered the children who hadn't received the educational support that donors thought they were funding. You know what the worst part is," I said, fingering the key that still sat on our kitchen counter. "They actually think they're good parents. They think providing financial security is the same thing as providing love. They think buying me a house makes up for missing my wedding." "Maybe they do think that," Michael said carefully. "But that doesn't make it true." I picked up the key, feeling its weight in my palm. Such a small thing to carry so much meaning. "This isn't a gift," I said slowly. "It's evidence. Evidence of where their priorities really lie. Evidence of how they've been making their money. Evidence of how little they actually understand about what I need from them." The rage was crystallizing now, hardening into something sharper and more focused. For 32 years, I'd been the understanding daughter, the one who made their choices easier by never demanding better. I'd absorbed their neglect and called it normal, had swallowed their excuses and smiled. But I was done being understanding. I was done making their lives easier. "I want to go to Malibu," I said suddenly. "I want to see this house they think is worth more than my wedding day. I want to understand exactly what they believe they've bought with their absence." Michael nodded slowly. "When?" "Now, today, before I lose my nerve and talk myself into being grateful again." Because I could feel it already, the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The voice in my head whispering that maybe I should just take the money and move on. That maybe confronting them would only cause more pain. But some wounds needed to be opened before they could properly heal, and some truths needed to be faced, no matter how much they hurt. The house in Malibu was exactly what I'd expected, and somehow worse. We'd driven down from Denver on Tuesday, checking into a modest hotel in Santa Monica before making the 20-minute drive up Pacific Coast Highway to see what my parents considered an appropriate consolation prize for missing my wedding. The address led us to a gated community perched on the cliffs, where Mediterranean-style mansions gazed out over the Pacific like silent sentinels guarding their owners' secrets. 1247 Pacific Coast Highway was a sprawling white stucco fortress with red tile roofing, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a circular driveway that could have accommodated a small wedding reception, the kind of house that screamed new money trying very hard to look like old money. "Jesus!" Michael breathed as we pulled up to the gate. "This is obscene." The key worked. Of course. My parents were nothing if not efficient when it came to their transactions. The front door opened to reveal 6,000 square feet of marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and the kind of aggressive luxury that money could buy but taste couldn't teach. Everything was beige and gold and painfully expensive, like a hotel lobby designed by someone who'd only ever seen rich people in movies. "They bought this 6 months ago," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. "Cash, no mortgage, $4 million like it was pocket change." We wandered through room after room of untouched perfection. A kitchen with professional-grade appliances that had never been used, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 16, a library filled with leather-bound books that had probably been purchased by the yard, 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar, and a 3-car garage housing a BMW, a Mercedes, and a vintage Porsche, all with temporary plates. "It's like a showroom," Michael observed. "There's nothing personal here. No family photos, no personal belongings. It's just stuff." He was right. The house felt hollow despite being filled with expensive furniture and artwork. It was the physical manifestation of my parents' approach to love: buy the best of everything and assume that quantity could substitute for quality, that price tags could replace presents. But it was the home office that made my blood run cold. Unlike the rest of the house, this room showed signs of actual use. The massive mahogany desk was covered with documents. Multiple computer monitors displayed spreadsheets and financial reports, and the walls were lined with filing cabinets. This was where my parents conducted their real business, the business that had paid for all of this. "Sam," Michael called from behind the desk. "You need to see this." He'd found a folder labeled Samantha Reed Foundation Projects in the top drawer. Inside were dozens of documents that made my stomach churn. Grant applications for educational programs that had never been implemented, fake invoices for services that had never been provided, contracts with companies that existed only on paper, companies owned by shell corporations that traced back to my parents. "Look at this," I said, pulling out a letter written on official foundation letterhead. "It's a thank you note to a major donor, signed with my name. I never wrote this. I never even knew this donor existed." The letter thanked someone named Margaret Walsh for her generous contribution of $50,000 to the Samantha Reed Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Youth. It described how her donation would directly impact the lives of children in need and was signed, "With deepest gratitude, Samantha Reed, Foundation Director." I had never been the Foundation's director. I had never seen a penny of Margaret Walsh's $50,000. But somewhere out there, she probably thought she was funding college scholarships for kids who couldn't otherwise afford higher education. "There are dozens of these," Michael said, flipping through the folder. "Donors, grant applications, program descriptions, all using your name, all completely fabricated." My hands were shaking as I opened another filing cabinet, more evidence of systematic fraud, all conducted under the banner of helping children. Summer camp programs that existed only on paper, after-school tutoring initiatives that had never served a single child, educational supply drives where the supplies were never purchased, let alone distributed. $2.3 million. I read from a financial summary. That's how much the Samantha Reed Children's Fund has collected in the last 5 years. Guess how much actually went to helping children? How much? $78,000, 3.4%. I slammed the folder down on the desk. They've been stealing money from people who wanted to help kids, and they've been doing it using my name. But the worst discovery was yet to come. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, I found a thick folder labeled Future Projects, Confidential. Inside were business plans that made everything else look like small-time fraud. "They're planning to expand," I said, my voice hollow. "The Samantha Reed Foundation for Environmental Justice, the Samantha Reed Institute for Community Development, the Samantha Reed Center for Educational Excellence." I looked up at Michael, feeling sick. They want to turn me into a brand. The documents outlined plans for multiple fake charities, all using variations of my name, all designed to funnel money through an increasingly complex web of shell companies and administrative fees. They'd even included a marketing strategy that played up my work at Evergreen Foundation, describing me as a passionate advocate for social justice with a proven track record in nonprofit management. "They're going to use your actual job to legitimize their fake charities," Michael said, reading over my shoulder. "They already have been." I pulled out another document, a letter from the IRS acknowledging the tax-exempt status of something called the Samantha Reed Environmental Trust. The application had been filed 3 months ago, listing me as the executive director and using my work history at Evergreen Foundation as evidence of my qualifications. I had never heard of the Samantha Reed Environmental Trust, but according to these documents, I was already running it. "This is identity theft," I said, my voice growing harder with each revelation. "They're not just committing charity fraud, they're stealing my identity to do it." Michael was photographing everything with his phone, document after document of evidence. "Sam, this goes way beyond missing your wedding. This is criminal conspiracy. They're defrauding donors, filing false tax returns, creating fictitious organizations. And they think a house in Malibu makes it okay," I finished. "They think if they give me enough money, I'll never ask questions about where it came from." I sank into the leather chair behind the desk, feeling the weight of my parents' betrayal settling over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about abandoning me on my wedding day, though that was painful enough. This was about systematically exploiting my name and reputation to commit crimes. This was about stealing from people who wanted to help children and laughing all the way to the bank. How long have they been doing this?" I wondered aloud, opening another file drawer. "How many people have they cheated? How many children could have been actually helped with the money they've stolen?" The scope of it was staggering. Years of fraudulent activities, millions of dollars stolen from well-meaning donors, dozens of fake programs that existed only to justify administrative fees, and all of it connected to my name, my reputation, my work in the nonprofit sector. They've been planning this for years, I realized, looking at documents dating back to when I first started working at Evergreen Foundation. They saw my career in environmental work as an opportunity. They've been building their fraud around my legitimate reputation. Michael sat down across from me, his face grim. "What do you want to do?" I looked around the office at the evidence of my parents' crimes scattered across the expensive desk, at the monitors displaying financial reports funded by stolen money, at the filing cabinets full of lies told in my name. "I want justice," I said simply, "not just for me, but for every person who thought they were helping children, for every donor who believed their money was making a difference, for every child who could have been actually helped if that money had gone where it was supposed to go. Because this wasn't just personal anymore. This was bigger than my hurt feelings about missed birthdays and empty chairs at my wedding. This was about stopping criminals who happened to be my parents before they could hurt more people. The old Samantha would have been paralyzed by the enormity of it, would have been too afraid of the consequences to act. But the woman sitting in this office full of evidence wasn't the same person who'd walked down the aisle 4 days ago. This woman was ready for war. The house in Malibu was exactly what I'd expected, and somehow worse. We'd driven down from Denver on Tuesday, checking into a modest hotel in Santa Monica before making the 20-minute drive up Pacific Coast Highway to see what my parents considered an appropriate consolation prize for missing my wedding. The address led us to a gated community perched on the cliffs, where Mediterranean-style mansions gazed out over the Pacific like silent sentinels guarding their owners' secrets. 1247 Pacific Coast Highway was a sprawling white stucco fortress with red tile roofing, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a circular driveway that could have accommodated a small wedding reception. The kind of house that screamed new money trying very hard to look like old money. "Jesus," Michael breathed as we pulled up to the gate. "This is obscene." The key worked. Of course, my parents were nothing if not efficient when it came to their transactions. The front door opened to reveal 6,000 square feet of marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and the kind of aggressive luxury that money could buy but taste couldn't teach. Everything was beige and gold and painfully expensive, like a hotel lobby designed by someone who'd only ever seen rich people in movies. "They bought this 6 months ago," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. "Cash, no mortgage. $4 million like it was pocket change." We wandered through room after room of untouched perfection. A kitchen with professional-grade appliances that had never been used. A formal dining room with a table that could seat 16. A library filled with leather-bound books that had probably been purchased by the yard. 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar, and a 3-car garage housing a BMW, a Mercedes, and a vintage Porsche, all with temporary plates. "It's like a showroom," Michael observed. "There's nothing personal here. No family photos, no personal belongings. It's just stuff." He was right. The house felt hollow despite being filled with expensive furniture and artwork. It was the physical manifestation of my parents' approach to love: buy the best of everything and assume that quantity could substitute for quality, that price tags could replace presence. But it was the home office that made my blood run cold. Unlike the rest of the house, this room showed signs of actual use. The massive mahogany desk was covered with documents. Multiple computer monitors displayed spreadsheets and financial reports, and the walls were lined with filing cabinets. This was where my parents conducted their real business, the business that had paid for all of this. "Sam," Michael called from behind the desk. "You need to see this." He'd found a folder labeled Samantha Reed Foundation Projects in the top drawer. Inside were dozens of documents that made my stomach churn. Grant applications for educational programs that had never been implemented, fake invoices for services that had never been provided, contracts with companies that existed only on paper, companies owned by shell corporations that traced back to my parents. "Look at this," I said, pulling out a letter written on official foundation letterhead. "It's a thank you note to a major donor, signed with my name. I never wrote this. I never even knew this donor existed." The letter thanked someone named Margaret Walsh for her generous contribution of $50,000 to the Samantha Reed Scholarship Fund for underprivileged youth. It described how her donation would directly impact the lives of children in need and was signed with deepest gratitude, Samantha Reed, Foundation Director. I had never been the Foundation's director. I had never seen a penny of Margaret Walsh's $50,000, but somewhere out there, she probably thought she was funding college scholarships for kids who couldn't otherwise afford higher education. "There are dozens of these," Michael said, flipping through the folder. "Donors, grant applications, program descriptions, all using your name, all completely fabricated." My hands were shaking as I opened another filing cabinet, more evidence of systematic fraud, all conducted under the banner of helping children. Summer camp programs that existed only on paper, after-school tutoring initiatives that had never served a single child, educational supply drives where the supplies were never purchased, let alone distributed. $2.3 million. I read from a financial summary. That's how much the Samantha Reed Children's Fund has collected in the last 5 years. Guess how much actually went to helping children? How much? $78,000, 3.4%. I slammed the folder down on the desk. They've been stealing money from people who wanted to help kids, and they've been doing it using my name. But the worst discovery was yet to come. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, I found a thick folder labeled Future Projects Confidential. Inside were business plans that made everything else look like small-time fraud. "They're planning to expand," I said, my voice hollow. "The Samantha Reed Foundation for Environmental Justice, the Samantha Reed Institute for Community Development, the Samantha Reed Center for Educational Excellence." I looked up at Michael, feeling sick. They want to turn me into a brand. The documents outlined plans for multiple fake charities, all using variations of my name, all designed to funnel money through an increasingly complex web of shell companies and administrative fees. They'd even included a marketing strategy that played up my work at Evergreen Foundation, describing me as a passionate advocate for social justice with a proven track record in nonprofit management. "They're going to use your actual job to legitimize their fake charities," Michael said, reading over my shoulder. "They already have been." I pulled out another document, a letter from the IRS acknowledging the tax-exempt status of something called the Samantha Reed Environmental Trust. The application had been filed 3 months ago, listing me as the executive director and using my work history at Evergreen Foundation as evidence of my qualifications. I had never heard of the Samantha Reed Environmental Trust, but according to these documents, I was already running it. "This is identity theft," I said, my voice growing harder with each revelation. "They're not just committing charity fraud, they're stealing my identity to do it." Michael was photographing everything with his phone, document after document of evidence. "Sam, this goes way beyond missing your wedding. This is criminal conspiracy. They're defrauding donors, filing false tax returns, creating fictitious organizations. And they think a house in Malibu makes it okay." I finished. "They think if they give me enough money, I'll never ask questions about where it came from." I sank into the leather chair behind the desk, feeling the weight of my parents' betrayal settling over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about abandoning me on my wedding day, though that was painful enough. This was about systematically exploiting my name and reputation to commit crimes. This was about stealing from people who wanted to help children and laughing all the way to the bank. How long have they been doing this?" I wondered aloud, opening another file drawer. How many people have they cheated? How many children could have been actually helped with the money they've stolen? The scope of it was staggering. Years of fraudulent activities, millions of dollars stolen from well-meaning donors, dozens of fake programs that existed only to justify administrative fees, and all of it connected to my name, my reputation, my work in the nonprofit sector. "So they've been planning this for years," I realized, looking at documents dating back to when I first started working at Evergreen Foundation. They saw my career in environmental work as an opportunity. They've been building their fraud around my legitimate reputation. Michael sat down across from me, his face grim. "What do you want to do?" I looked around the office at the evidence of my parents' crimes scattered across the expensive desk, at the monitors displaying financial reports funded by stolen money, at the filing cabinets full of lies told in my name. "I want justice," I said simply. "Not just for me, but for every person who thought they were helping children, for every donor who believed their money was making a difference, for every child who could have been actually helped if that money had gone where it was supposed to go." Because this wasn't just personal anymore. This was bigger than my hurt feelings about missed birthdays and empty chairs at my wedding. This was about stopping criminals who happened to be my parents before they could hurt more people. The old Samantha would have been paralyzed by the enormity of it, would have been too afraid of the consequences to act. But the woman sitting in this office full of evidence wasn't the same person who'd walked down the aisle 4 days ago. This woman was ready for war, back in Denver. I transformed our dining room into a war room. For 3 weeks, I worked like a woman possessed. Every evening after my regular job at Evergreen Foundation, I spread documents across our table, cross-referenced financial records, and built what Chloe called a conspiracy board that would make the FBI jealous. Red string connected photos, bank statements, and fraudulent documents to a timeline that stretched back 7 years, the entire length of my career in nonprofit work. "You realize you haven't slept more than 4 hours a night since we got back from Malibu," Michael said, finding me hunched over my laptop at 2:15 in the morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups and highlighter-stained papers. "I found another one," I said without looking up. "The Samantha Reed Wildlife Preservation Fund, filed with the state of Colorado 6 months ago, listing me as the founding director. According to this, I've been running a wildlife conservation organization while working full-time at Evergreen." Michael sat down beside me, gently closing my laptop. "Sam, you need to sleep." "I can't sleep when there are people out there who think they've donated to legitimate charities." I reopened the laptop, showing him the donor list I'd been compiling. "Look at this. Michael. Margaret Walsh, the woman who gave $50,000 to the fake scholarship fund. She's a retired teacher from Pueblo. She probably saved for years to make that donation." The magnitude of my parents' betrayal grew clearer with each document I uncovered. They hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen hope. Every donor who'd written a check thinking they were helping children. Every foundation that had awarded grants to fake programs. Every volunteer who'd signed up to help with initiatives that existed only on paper. Chloe had been my partner in this investigation, using her skills as a financial analyst to trace money through the labyrinth of shell companies and administrative fees. She arrived most evenings with takeout food and a determination to help me uncover every lie my parents had told. "I've been thinking," she said one evening, spreading Chinese food containers across the cleared space on our table. "Your parents aren't just criminals, they're stupid criminals. They left a paper trail a blind accountant could follow." "Maybe they never thought I'd look," I replied, photographing another forged document. "Maybe they assumed I'd be so grateful for the house and the money that I'd never ask questions." "Or maybe," Chloe said slowly, "they wanted you to find it." I looked up from the documents. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Sam, your dad's been in business for 30 years. Your mom has an MBA from Wharton. They know how to hide money when they want to. But all of this," she gestured at the evidence spread before us, "it's practically gift-wrapped. The filing cabinet in the Malibu house wasn't even locked." The thought had been nagging at me too, though I'd been afraid to voice it. My parents were many things, but careless wasn't usually one of them. Yet they'd left enough evidence to convict themselves sitting in an unlocked drawer, in a house they'd given me the key to. "You think they want me to turn them in?" I asked. "I think they want you to have leverage," Michael said quietly. He'd been listening from the kitchen, and now he joined us at the table. "Think about it if you know about their crimes. You can't exactly go to the police without implicating yourself." "I'm not implicated. I didn't know about any of this." "But you are now," Chloe pointed out. "And you're sitting in their house. You've accepted their money. Your name is all over their fraudulent organizations. A good prosecutor could make you look like a co-conspirator." The realization hit me like a physical blow. My parents hadn't just stolen money using my name, they'd made me complicit in their crimes simply by giving me access to the evidence. Every day I spent investigating instead of reporting them to the authorities could be seen as participation. Every document I photographed could be portrayed as me helping to cover up their crimes. "They trapped me," I whispered. "Even in giving me the gift, they trapped me." "Not necessarily," Michael said. "We document everything. We show that you uncovered this information, that you were investigating it to understand the scope of their crimes. We make it clear that you're the one exposing them, not helping them." Over the next week, I built my case with methodical precision. Every forged signature was photographed and cross-referenced with my actual signature. Every fake program was documented alongside evidence that it had never been implemented. Every stolen dollar was traced from donor to my parents' accounts. I found Margaret Walsh's phone number and called her on a Thursday evening, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Mrs. Walsh, my name is Samantha Reed. I believe you made a donation to a scholarship fund that bears my name." The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of my life. Margaret Walsh was exactly what I'd imagined, a kind, elderly woman who'd taught elementary school for 40 years and had wanted to help other children get the education she'd never been able to afford herself. She'd saved for 3 years to make her donation, sacrificing vacations and luxuries to contribute to what she thought was a worthy cause. "I've been waiting to hear about which students received the scholarships," she said, her voice full of hope. "The foundation said they'd send updates about how my donation was being used." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. "Mrs. Walsh, I need to tell you something about that foundation." By the time I hung up, 20 minutes later, we were both crying. Margaret Walsh promised to gather her documentation and contact the other donors she knew. She also said something that stayed with me. "Honey, this isn't your fault, but now that you know, you have to do something about it." I made similar calls to 17 other donors over the next few days. The conversations were all heartbreaking in their own way, people who'd given generously, expecting nothing in return except the knowledge that they'd helped children. Instead, they'd funded my parents' luxury lifestyle and my unwanted inheritance. "I have enough," I told Michael and Chloe on Sunday evening, looking at the boxes of evidence we'd assembled. Financial records, forged documents, witness statements from defrauded donors, enough to put them away for a very long time. "So what's the plan?" Chloe asked. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my parents' contact information. They were still in Hawaii, still posting photos of sunset dinners and golf games on their social media accounts, still completely unaware that their daughter had spent 3 weeks unraveling their criminal empire. "The plan," I said, hitting the call button, "is to give them a chance to explain themselves. One last chance to tell me the truth before I hand everything over to the FBI." The phone rang 4 times before my mother answered, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "Samantha, sweetheart, how are you enjoying the house?" "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. "We need to talk." "Of course. Darling, how was the house? Isn't it magnificent? Your father and I are so excited for you to start your new life." "I know about the charities," I interrupted. "All of them. The Samantha Reed Children's Fund, the Environmental Trust, the Wildlife Preservation Fund. I know about the stolen donations, the fake programs, the forged signatures. I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. In the background, I could hear the sound of Hawaiian music and conversation from whatever restaurant they were dining at. "I think," my mother said finally, her voice suddenly cold and calculating, "that you and I need to have a conversation, face to face." "Yes," I agreed. "We do. I'll see you in Hawaii tomorrow." Because it was time to end this, one way or another. The Grand Wiley Resort in Maui was exactly the kind of place my parents would choose, ostentatious, expensive, and crawling with the sort of wealthy tourists who measured their worth in thread counts and wine vintages. I found them on the terrace of the resort's most exclusive restaurant, dining on $40 appetizers while the Pacific Ocean sparkled behind them like a postcard. They looked so normal, so perfectly composed in their vacation whites, my father's silver hair catching the late afternoon sun, my mother's designer sundress flowing in the ocean breeze. To anyone watching, they were simply a successful couple enjoying their golden years. No one would guess they were career criminals who'd built their fortune by stealing from charities. "Samantha." My mother rose to embrace me as if nothing had changed, as if I'd simply dropped by for a social visit. "You look tired, sweetheart. Have you been getting enough sleep?" I stepped back from her attempted hug, and something in my expression made her smile falter. "Hello, Linda, Charles." My father gestured to an empty chair at their table. "Please, sit. We've ordered you the mahi-mahi. It's excellent here." "I'm not staying for dinner." I remained standing, my purse clutched tightly against my side. Inside was a USB drive containing copies of everything I'd found, every forged document, every fraudulent tax filing, every piece of evidence that could send them to prison for decades. "Darling, you seem upset," my mother said. her voice taking on that soothing tone she used when she wanted to manage a situation. I know the revelations about your trust fund must be overwhelming, but— Revelations. I laughed, and the sound made several nearby diners look up from their meals. Is that what we're calling charity fraud now? Revelations. My father's face darkened. Lower your voice. Samantha, people are listening. Good. Let them listen. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken in Malibu. I want you to explain this to me. Charles, this document right here, with my forged signature, authorizing the transfer of $50,000 from the Samantha Reed Children's Fund to one of your shell companies. You went through our private papers. My mother's voice was sharp now, the maternal facade dropping away. Samantha, that was completely inappropriate. Inappropriate. I felt the rage building. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and broken-hearted donors fueling my words. You want to talk about inappropriate? Let's talk about Margaret Walsh, the retired teacher who saved for 3 years to donate to your fake scholarship fund. Let's talk about the dozens of people who thought they were helping children while you were buying yourself a Porsche. My father glanced around the restaurant nervously. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private. No, we're going to continue it right here, right now. I pulled up another photo on my phone. This is a letter thanking a donor for contributing to the Samantha Reed Environmental Trust, an organization I've never heard of, supposedly run by me, that has collected over $300,000 in the past 6 months alone. Where is that money? Charles. The money is safe, he said quietly. It's all been placed in investments for your future. It was stolen from people who thought they were protecting the environment. My voice was getting louder, and I didn't care. You took money from people who wanted to fight climate change and you used it to buy vacation homes. My mother reached across the table, trying to grab my phone. Samantha, stop this nonsense. You're making a scene. I pulled the phone away from her grasp. I'm making a scene. I'm making a scene. The words came out in a crescendo that turned heads throughout the restaurant. You missed my wedding to close a business deal. You've been committing fraud using my name for years, and I'm the one making a scene. We missed your wedding to secure your future, my father hissed, his own voice rising now. Everything we've done has been for you. For me, I slammed my hand down on the table, making the wine glasses jump. Stealing from charities was for me. Forging my signature was for me. Using my name to lie to donors was for me. The restaurant had gone quiet now, other diners openly staring at our table. I could see phones being discreetly held up, recording what was probably going to be tomorrow's viral video. But I was past caring about appearances. You want to know what would have been for me? I continued, my voice carrying across the terrace. Showing up to my wedding would have been for me. Being present for my childhood would have been for me. Not committing crimes in my name would have been for me. Keep your voice down, my mother snapped, but her composure was cracking. You have no idea what we've sacrificed to build this life for you. What you've sacrificed? I laughed again, harsh and bitter. What about what I sacrificed? What about the 32 years I spent hoping you'd love me enough to prioritize me over money? What about the donors you've been lying to? What about the children who could have been helped with the money you stole? My father stood up abruptly, throwing his napkin down on the table. That's enough. Samantha, you're being hysterical. Hysterical. The word hit me like a slap, and suddenly, all the rage I'd been carrying for weeks crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. I'm being hysterical. I'm being precise. Charles, I have documentation of every crime you've committed. I have bank records, forged documents, witness statements from the donors you've defrauded. I have enough evidence to put you both in prison for the rest of your lives. The color drained from my mother's face. You wouldn't. Watch me. I pulled the USB drive from my purse and held it up so they could see it. This contains copies of everything. Every fraudulent charity, every forged signature, every stolen dollar, and tomorrow morning, I'm handing it over to the FBI. Samantha, you need to think about this carefully, my father said, his voice suddenly pleading. If you expose us, you expose yourself. Your name is on those organizations. A prosecutor could claim you were complicit. Let them try. I slipped the USB drive back into my purse. I have 3 weeks of documentation showing my investigation into your crimes. I have recorded phone calls with the donors you defrauded. I have evidence that I was completely unaware of your activities until you gave me the key to your evidence room. My mother was crying now, her perfect makeup running in the Hawaiian humidity. We love you, Samantha. Everything we did was because we love you. No. I looked down at both of them, these people who'd given me life but never learned how to give me love. Everything you did was because you love money. You love control. You love the image of being successful parents without actually doing the work of parenting. I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. Oh, and Linda Charles. You might want to enjoy the rest of your vacation. It's going to be your last one for a very long time. As I walked away from their table, leaving them sitting in stunned silence while their fellow diners whispered and pointed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 32 years, complete and total freedom from their approval. The old Samantha would have been devastated by the scene I'd just caused. She would have apologized, would have tried to smooth things over, would have protected them from the consequences of their actions one more time. But the woman walking through the Grand Wiley Resort toward the exit wasn't the same person who'd walked down the aisle 2 weeks ago. This woman was done protecting people who'd never protected her. This woman was ready to watch her parents face justice. And tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, she was going to make sure they did. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the balcony of my modest Maui hotel room, watching the sun rise over the Pacific while I made final preparations for what would either be justice or the complete destruction of my family. At 7:30 in the morning, I called Special Agent Maria Rodriguez of the FBI's white-collar crime unit, whom I'd contacted from Denver 3 days earlier. Mrs. Turner, are you ready to proceed? I'm ready, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to set in motion. They're staying at the Grand Wiley Resort, room 1247. They'll probably try to leave the island today after our conversation last night. We'll be there within the hour. Are you certain you want to witness this? I thought about Margaret Walsh, crying on the phone when I'd told her about the scholarship fund that had never helped a single child. I thought about the dozens of other donors who'd been lied to, the legitimate charities that had lost funding because people thought they were already giving to my parents' fake organizations. I thought about 32 years of choosing them over and over again while they chose money. I'm certain. At 9:45 that morning, I stood in the lobby of the Grand Wiley Resort and watched my parents being led through the marble foyer in handcuffs. Other guests stared and whispered. Phones appeared to capture the moment, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the click of cameras from news photographers who'd been tipped off about the arrests. My mother saw me first, even in handcuffs, even with her perfect hair disheveled and her makeup smeared from crying. She managed to look imperious. Samantha, she called out as the agents guided her past. You'll regret this. Family doesn't destroy family. You're right, I called back, my voice carrying across the busy lobby. Family doesn't destroy family, but criminals do destroy people, and I won't be complicit in that anymore. My father didn't look at me at all. He kept his eyes straight ahead as they led him toward the waiting police cars, his silver hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the resort's floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, he looked older than his 68 years, diminished somehow without his usual armor of expensive suits and boardroom confidence. I felt no satisfaction in watching them go, no vindication, no sense of victory, just a profound sadness for the family we could have been if they'd ever learned that love wasn't a transaction. Agent Rodriguez approached me as the cars pulled away. This is going to be a complex case, Mrs. Turner. With your cooperation, we're looking at charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and charitable solicitation fraud across multiple states. They're looking at 20 to 30 years each. What about the money? I asked. The legitimate assets will be returned to the defrauded charities and donors. The houses, cars, investments, all of it will be liquidated. There might be enough to compensate most of the victims, though probably not at 100%. I nodded, thinking about Margaret Walsh and her carefully saved donation. At least she might get some of her money back, even if the children she'd hoped to help never would receive the scholarships she'd funded. And the properties they gave me. That's more complicated. If you can prove you had no knowledge of the criminal activity, you might be able to keep some of it. But given the scope of their fraud, you might want to consider donating those assets to legitimate charities. I'd already been thinking about that. The Malibu house, the trust fund, even the paid-off mortgage in Denver, all of it felt tainted now, built on the broken dreams of donors who'd thought they were helping children. I couldn't build a life on that foundation. I want it all to go to real charities, I said. The house can be sold, and the money can go to actual educational programs. The trust fund can be divided among environmental organizations that are actually trying to save the planet. All of it. Agent Rodriguez looked surprised. Mrs. Turner, you're talking about walking away from millions of dollars. I'm talking about sleeping at night, I corrected. I'm talking about building a life that doesn't depend on stolen money. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom in downtown Denver and watched my parents receive their sentences, 25 years each, with the possibility of parole in 15. They would spend what remained of their lives in federal prison, surrounded by the consequences of choosing money over everything else that mattered. They still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. Even during their sentencing, they maintained that everything had been for Samantha's future. The judge had been unimpressed by their justifications. As I walked out of the courthouse, Chloe linked her arm through mine. How are you holding up? I'm free, I said, and meant it. For the first time in my life. I'm completely free. The money from the liquidated assets had been distributed to legitimate charities, just as I'd requested. Margaret Walsh had received her $50,000 back, plus interest, and had immediately donated it again, this time to a scholarship fund I'd personally vetted. The Malibu house had sold for $4.2 million, all of which went to environmental organizations that were actually working to combat climate change. Michael and I had kept our modest townhouse in Capitol Hill, paid for now with our own honest work rather than blood money. I'd been promoted to Director of Development at Evergreen Foundation, where I was using everything I'd learned about fraudulent charities to help donors make informed decisions about their giving. It wasn't the life my parents had planned for me, no trust fund, no mansion, no generational wealth built on stolen dreams, but it was a life I could be proud of, built on choices I could defend, surrounded by people who showed up when it mattered. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings when Michael and I read the newspaper over coffee in our small kitchen, I thought about the 32-year-old woman who'd once stood in a wedding dress, hoping her parents would choose her over money just once. She'd finally learned that sometimes you have to choose yourself. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, discovery, and ultimately finding the courage to choose justice over family loyalty. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with fellow story lovers around the world. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this tale, and share your thoughts about Samantha's journey. Would you have made the same choice she did? I'd love to hear your perspective on this complex story of family, money, and finding your own moral compass.